All right, it is 7 o'clock. I don't know about you, Duane, but I'm ready.
I'm ready to go.
Cool. All right. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. The Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum is thrilled to present this webinar series with Duane Vandenbusche all about the history of the Gunnison Country. If you'd like to support this program as well as a scholarship or an educational scholarship for a local student, please visit crestedbuttemuseum.com, or you can send checks to P.O. Box 2480. If you want to find out more information, please do visit crestedbuttemuseum.com or give us a call. We always love to hear from you at 970-349-1880. Just so you guys know, we're also holding a raffle right now, a summer raffle with some amazing prizes. We've got a townie bike from the Alpineer. We've got a week stay in Molokai, Hawaii. We've got a 10 to 14 night stay with a timeshare with VI Resorts. We also have a membership museum package and all-time bonus $500 cash prize. So if you'd like to support, again, if you'd like to support the museum, visit crescentbuttemuseum.com to make a donation, to become a member, to buy a raffle ticket, and to support this scholarship that Duane has been organizing with the museum. If you are in town or you're planning to visit, the museum is holding walking tours all through the summer. Right now we have them scheduled Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. For those walking tours, you not only get to walk up and down downtown, but you also get to walk through time. So you learn through our architecture and our buildings. You get a chance to learn our local history. Also, if you're interested in seeing any of the past webinars, we do have all the recordings available again at crestedbuttemuseum.com. There's also different programming that we're planning on and trying to get ready for. So be sure to sign up for our newsletter so that you can get all the update information as well. I also just want to say one more time, a huge thank you to everybody that has been a part of our Black and White Ball, who has been a part of our National Historic Preservation Month series, and now part of this Gunnison Country History webinar series. I find it very lucky that I get to go to work at the museum every day and hear stories from not only Duane, but from all of our visitors, and it means so much to me. And so just a huge thank you to everybody who's ever come to share a story or participated in all of our events. If you'd like to help us continue our work in preserving local history and sharing local history, visit crestedbuttemuseum.com. All right, Duane, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Nell, and thank everybody for tuning in. We've got over 200 people tonight, which is fantastic, and I thank all of you for tuning in. A little word, next week we're going to be talking about the narrow gauge railroads of the Gunnison Country with a little background before we even do that. And I want to echo what Nell said about the scholarships. With this coronavirus, we've got a lot of low-income people in the Gunnison Country, and a lot of kids at both the community school in Crested, Butte, and Gunnison are great students, and they sure could use the help. So anything you folks can do would be great. Today, we're going to talk about the mining camps of the Gunnison Country, and I'm going to give a little background. The Colorado Gold Rush began in 1858 and then really picked up in 1859. It was caused by what was known as Bleeding Kansas, a civil war going on in Kansas that was a mini feature to the Civil War to come in the United States, North versus South. On top of that, they had a panic, an economic downturn in 1857 in the Midwest. And most importantly, there was a guidebook written by a man named D.C. Oakes, the Pikes Peak Guidebook, in which he told one lie after another concerning the gold rush in Colorado. Distances from the Mississippi River to Colorado shrank by a half. Bridges miraculously appeared over streams. And he also said that when you come to Colorado, make sure you have reinforced shovels and reinforced containers, because gold is heavy and you don't want to have your shovel handles break off as you dig the gold out of the ground. And people actually believe that stuff, that there was gold under every rock. So 100,000 started out for Colorado, which at that time, of course, was Western Kansas. There's no Colorado at that time. and they came with every means of conveyance. Mormons pulled hand carts. Other people had 4 mules pulling a wagon. Some walked, some rode horseback, and some attempted to use wind wagons. They put a sail on top of a wagon and they thought they'd tack on the way out and then breeze along at 20 miles an hour with the wind at their back when they returned. And of course, Indians probably looked at this, and even the sedate Indians must have almost smiled at the stupidity of it. Half of the people turned back within 3 weeks because of the distance, because of Indians, because of little water, and because of cholera. Only a few more stayed a few weeks. Very few of them found gold. On the side of wagons as they returned to Kansas, there were signs like, "In God we trusted, and in Kansas we busted," or "busted by God." By the end of 1859, out of the 100,000 people who headed towards Colorado, about 10,000 were here. Mark Twain's famous comment was absolutely correct. And that is his comment that a mine is a hole in the ground owned by a liar. Some gold, however, was found. And you're looking at a placer mining diggings out by Central City in 1861. Some of the gold that was found early was found by a man named George Jackson, who went up Clear Creek Canyon, saw some hot springs on the left side of the road, filed a claim, and came back the next month when the springs started to come and laid out a town that was called Idaho Springs. John Gregory came up Clear Creek Canyon, hit a gulch that came in from the right, and found a lot of gold in what became known as Gregory Gulch. When he found that gold and Central City and Blackhawk would come in it, his famous comment was, "Now my wife will become a lady and my children will become educated." Other places opened up: California Gulch, soon to be known as Leadville, Breckenridge on the western slope, and Gold Hill above Boulder. By 1859, Denver, Boulder, LaPorte, Central City, Blackhawk all existed as mining camps. And you're looking now at a great photo of Blackhawk, Colorado, 1864, twin city of Central City. And gambling, of course, goes on there today. Colorado, however, had the toughest ore in the nation to reduce. And one metallurgist report of 1864 said this, quote, "Colorado has the most complex ore in the nation, and gold and silver can only be melted by a long and complicated and expensive process." Early gold was found with placer mining and gold panning. And that was an individual miner scooping out a little debris out of the bottom of a stream bed and then gently rotating it downhill with water in it. And if you were lucky, a little black sand was on the bottom, and that was gold. And then you had rocks in the bottom of the pan also, and you took a forceps and you took the rocks out, and then you poured a little mercury in the bottom of the pan, and that amalgamated or linked up with gold. And then you burned the mercury off, and what was left in the bottom of the pan was always called pay dirt. The dirt on the bottom of the pan that paid. That was free gold. Shot, wire, grain, flour, dust, and nugget. Put it in your saddlebags and ride away. Didn't need any smelting at all. However, after that early gold was found, and all the streams were panned out, now you turn to a different kind of mining, and that was called hard rock mining or quartz mining. And the day of the individual miner was now over, because now you had to go deep into the bowels of the earth. And that took a lot of technology and a lot of men and a lot of money. It involved big companies. And now the old adage in Colorado was that good gold was $200 to the ton. And what I mean by that was you brought up 1 ton of muck and rock and debris from 500 feet down, let us say. And somewhere in that 1 ton were 10 ounces of gold, which sold at 20 an ounce at that time. 20 bucks times 10 ounces, $200 to the ton. But it was very difficult to find that gold and reduce it. And by 1867, most of Colorado's population was starting to leave. Ghost towns appeared. Gold production went down by a half because you didn't have any way of smelting the gold, finding the gold. And then in 1867, the Boston and Colorado Mining Company out of Massachusetts sent in a trained metallurgist named Nathan Hill from Brown University. And Nathan Hill went over to their mine in Blackhawk and took samples. And he went by wagon to the Mississippi River, and then he went by train to the East Coast, and then he went by boat 3 weeks to Wales in the British Isles. And there were the best miners in the world. The Welsh miners have been working in the tin mines for 7 centuries. If they couldn't reduce the ore, it couldn't be reduced. And Nathan Hill took it over there, and the Welsh miners were able to reduce that ore onto a copper mat or a copper base. Still not the final separation yet, but a long ways towards it. Nathan Hill came back to the United States, and 5 years later, in 1873, he found a way to get the gold off of the copper base, saving Colorado's gold industry. Of all the men in Colorado history, in my opinion, Nathan Hill is one of the 3 greatest of them all. Became a multimillionaire, later on U.S. Senator, but he saved Colorado's gold industry by finding a way to smelt that ore. In 1869, Colorado entered a silver boom, with the first great silver camp opening up at the great town of Caribou, not far from Nederland and Boulder. And miners would now follow the Colorado mineral belt, 250 miles long, 50 miles wide, running in a southwesterly direction, Caribou in the north to Silverton in the south. Every great precious metal mining camp in Colorado history except one is in that belt. Caribou, Georgetown, Aspen, Central City, Blackhawk, Leadville, San Juan, Creed. Only Cripple Creek Victor is outside of it, and that is an extinct volcano. Great silver camps now came, highlighted by the Silver Queen of Colorado, the great town of Georgetown, which you're looking at right now. Georgetown was the #1 silver camp in Colorado, and along with other now silver towns opening up, Silver Plume, Leadville, Aspen, Telluride, Silverton, Ouray, and Creed all open. If high-grade silver was found at Leadville in the San Juan, then the Gunnison Country in between and in the mineral belt surely must have riches too. Now, miners were the most optimistic people in the United States. I'll tell you a great story. Miner died, this was told in mining camps around Colorado. Miner died, went to heaven. And everybody who heard that statement chuckled and said, no miner ever went to heaven. Sorting around with prostitutes, drinking a lot of booze and gambling. But this guy had abstained from all of that, and he went to heaven. And he met St. Peter at the Golden Gate. He presented his pass, and St. Peter said, can't take you, we're booked. And the miner said, what the hell you mean we're booked? And St. Peter said, well, we had a big religious war out in the Middle East, and a lot of good people died. He said, never happened before, and I'm sorry. And the miner said, I am not going to be the guy who abstained from all the pleasures in life to get to heaven, to be told I can't get in. I want a temporary pass, and if I can convince one person to come out, I'm in. St. Peter said, never happened in a million years. Nobody's ever left heaven. Miner said, shut up and give me the pass. And St. Peter felt bad about it, and he knew nobody was going to come out, so he gave the miner a pass. And the miner went into heaven, and 8 minutes later, 4,674 people streamed out of heaven, and they appeared to be in a fast hurry to get out. And St. Peter grabbed the miner by the backpack, and he said, what in the hell did you tell those people? And the miner said, what do you mean, what did I tell him? He said, I just told us a big gold strike down in hell. And then the miner grabbed his backpack and headed away from heaven. And by this time, St. Peter was hot, and he grabbed the miner. He said, where the hell do you think you're going? And the miner said, what do you mean, where do you think I'm going? He says, haven't you heard there's a big gold strike down in hell? The miners believed their own publicity. All there had to be was a rumor, and they were on their way. In the early 1880s, 25 to 40,000 people flocked into the Gunnison Country, surely the next great mining region. Now you're looking at one of the ways they got in. 4 horses getting a stage, and this one happens to be on Red Mountain Pass between Ouray and Silverton. But we had a lot of bridges like that in the Gunnison Country also. Great silver camps opened up in the Gunnison Country. Irwin, 10 miles west of Crested Butte. Gothic, 8 miles north of Crested Butte. Tin Cup at the edge of Taylor Park. Pitkin on Quartz Creek, and White Pine at the base of Monarch Pass. Along with these great camps were several other ones which didn't last very long, maybe a couple of weeks. Pittsburgh, Hidalgo, Dorchester, Hillerton, Vulcan, Iris, Chance, and Obie Joyful. 2 towns in the Gunnison Country did not have their eggs in one basket. And those were the supply towns, the railroad towns, and the smelter towns. They would survive when all those other camps died, and those towns were Gunnison and Crested Butte. 2 railroads came into the Gunnison Country. We'll talk about them next time, both narrow gauges. The Denver Rio Grande arrived from Denver via Marshall Pass into Gunnison, August of 1881. The Denver South Park came via the Great Alpine Tunnel into Gunnison the following year, September of 82. Along with the railroads came rich investors with names like Horace Tabor, Baron Rothschild from France, Pierre Dupont. Smelters were built, and the Gunnison Country looked like the place to be. There was even talk that Gunnison might be the next capital of Colorado. Irwin was the greatest camp in the Gunnison Country. It was named for a wanderer and a Pony Express rider named Dick Irwin. And there is the great camp of Irwin in the wintertime in 1880. Another name for the camp was Ruby, because of the ruby silver found there. Irwin opened up in 1879 on a divide between Coal and Anthracite Creeks, 10 miles west of Crested Butte, with towering Owen, Purple, and Ruby peaks high above it, along with Scarp Ridge. The major route into Irwin was not the route that you take today going through Crested Butte. It was rather over Ohio Pass. And you also had a 10-mile long pioneer wagon road connecting Irwin with nearby Crested Butte. Irwin was located at 10,033 feet and existed along a mile-long gulch that ended at beautiful Lake Irwin. Silver discoveries came at mines like the Forest Queen, and you're looking at the Forest Queen mine right now, 1885, the Bullion King and the Ruby Chief. And all these great silver mines brought 4,000 people in by late 1880. Irwin soon had 529 houses. There it is, 1882 at its peak. 529 houses, some 2 stories high, post office, bank, lots selling for $5,000, 23 saloons, 7 dance halls, and numerous houses of ill repute with ladies with names like Loose Tooth Leona, Sagebrush Annie, she of a very bad hairdo, and Timberline Kate, receding hairline. The Windsor Hotel, the Elk Mountain Pilot newspaper, and rich investors coming in every day. The Denver South Park and Pacific Railroad headed for Irwin after arriving in Gunnison of September of 82. You're looking now at the Hotel Belmont, 2 stories high in Irwin in 1882. Pretty pretentious. The South Park Railroad got to Baldwin up Ohio Creek, 15 miles from Gunnison, and then graded into Irwin. But when the mining boom ended there, it never got there. At the elevation of Irwin, over 10,000 feet, avalanches were dangerous. 2 avalanches killed 12 people as the snow roared off nearby peaks in the 1880s and 90s. The camp also had the Irwin Club, made up of over 100 men. Women in the camp were very suspicious about what went on there. Gambling, maybe ladies of ill repute, a lot of drinking. So the men, to avail the suspicions of the women, threw a party where the ladies were invited. But some of the bachelors in camp weren't very happy, and they sprinkled itching powder on the benches. And at 9 o'clock, all of the women went home, and a lot of the men went home itching like hell and more suspicious than ever. The famous New York newspaper reporter Nellie Bly of Around the World in 80 Days fame visited Irwin for a story in 1880 and was taken skiing by John E. Phillips of the Elk Mountain Pilot and other prominent men. Now, Nellie Bly had never been on a pair of skis, so she went downhill and upset, and her feet were sticking straight up in the air. When they finally got her upright, everybody was laughing, and Nellie Bly wasn't used to being laughed at by a bunch of damn hicks in the mountains. And she wagged her finger under Johnny Phillips' nose and said, "Sir, it's pretty obvious to me that you are no gentleman." And Johnny Phillips was equal to the task, and he said, "Madam, after seeing you upside down in the snow, it is also obvious to us that you are not a gentleman." The Irwin boom ended by the year 1884. Weather had the camp closed for 6 months. A railroad never arrived. The silver was in knife blade seams and not very rich, and the price of silver was heading down. One of the famous things about Irwin is its cemetery near the top of Kebler Pass. Mary Bambro, 17-year-old girl, died of scarlet fever in 1883 and is buried there. And she has the most famous inscription on her tombstone in Colorado history. "All you people, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon shall be. Prepare yourselves to follow me." And then a couple of years later, some wise ass put a sign in a little wooden platter there on the bottom, which said, "To follow you, I'll not consent until I found which way you went." Irwin's mines were worked on and off for years after the silver panic of 1893, but the good times were all gone. In the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, a retired man who actually was working there when he was still in the Army and then retired, John Hahn, worked his Forest Queen mine every summer for over 30 years. He'd dig about 5 or 6 feet in every year. And you walk into his cabin, which was open, and he had a sign there, and he said, "Take whatever you need, just replace it the next time you're there." A great old man who passed away in the 1990s. Today, about 50 people live in Irwin off the grid. And we have an organization called 11 that has got a great cat skiing operation there. Gothic was the next great silver town in the Gunnison Country. It was the famous city of silver wires, because that's how the silver came out of the mine, silver wires. Located 8 miles north of Crested, Butte, where the East River and Copper Creek come together. And there it is, 1882, and towering over that silver camp is Gothic Peak, which resembled a Gothic cathedral. In addition to being a very promising silver camp, Gothic was also the supply camp for the camps to the north, like Elko and Schofield and Crystal. And it was also a stop for the long jack trains of 500 burros that came from Aspen, heading for the railhead at Crested Butte, carrying ore from one of the great silver camps in the world to the end of track and then returning with supplies. The camp opened in 1879 with the discovery of the Sylvanite mine 3 miles up Copper Creek. And in the twinkling of an eyelash, 3,000 people flocked in during the next 2 years. By 1880, Gothic had a post office, 4 stores, a bank, and 2 large hotels, the Olds and the 3-story Gothic Hotel, and you're looking at the 3-story Gothic Hotel. There were also many gambling establishments, saloons, and dance halls. Every evening, a huge bonfire was lit on the main street, with crowds drinking and telling stories. On Sunday, there were foot and horse races with much betting going on. And if there's ever any bad blood between two men, it was settled with a fist fight on the main drag of Gothic on Sunday morning. And there it is in 1880. And you're looking right up that gulch, heading out towards Schofield Park and Schofield Pass, and you can see the tents and the buildings that were put in. The Elk Mountain Bonanza newspaper came out in 1880, and a reporter named Robert Ingersoll visited Gothic in that year and said this: "The streets are filled with burro trains, and at night the drowning cry of the car dealers and the yells of happy prospectors resound through the darkness. Roads ran every direction out of Gothic, south to Crested Butte, north to Schofield Pass, east to East Maroon Pass and Aspen, and one into Taylor Park. Gothic began to fade by the late 1880s. 500 to 600 inches of snow a year, no railroad, low-grade ore, and the coming silver panic ended the days of glory. One man, however, who stayed was Garwood Judd, for whom Judd Falls up Copper Creek is named. Judd came out of Pennsylvania to Gothic in 1880 at 28. He speculated in mines, he owned a saloon, he served as mayor, and then when the boom ended and Gothic became a near ghost town, Garwood Judd stayed on as a caretaker and entertained visitors with tales of gone by. In 1928, the Fox Movie Company made a movie about him called The Man Who Stayed. Garwood Judd died in 1930 at the age of 78. And you can see the little plaque that is put in near Gothic on the man who stayed, Garwood Judd, legendary individual. In 1928, John C. Johnson, a biologist and a member of the first faculty at Colorado State Normal School in Gunnison, later Western State College, founded the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory in Gothic. The lab bought the entire town site soon thereafter and brought most of the top men of science in during summers to do high altitude research and study global warming and climate change. It still exists today and is world famous. Today, Gothic has another man who stayed. His name is Billy Barr, and he's lived in Gothic year-round for 44 years, keeping meticulous snowfall and weather records. A video has been made on him, and he's been interviewed on National Public Radio. Pitkin was another great silver camp. At 9,200 feet on Quartz Creek, 28 miles southeast of Gunnison, and in the shadows of the famous Alpine Tunnel 13 miles away. Nearby was Juanita Hot Springs and the legend of a great Indian maiden long ago. And you're looking at it right there, a collage of photographs of Juanita. The story goes that Juanita was a Ute Indian maiden, 18 years old, fell in love with a Shoshone warrior. War broke out between the Shoshone and the Utes. Her boyfriend was killed. Juanita lived for about 4 or 5 more days, wandering around, crying, and then died and was buried in a cave nearby. And everywhere her tears fell, hot springs bubbled out of the ground. Hence the name today, Juanita Hot Springs, for that Indian maiden. Very early in the 1860s, prospectors came in and around where Pitkin would be named later on. Armstrong Gulch, Tamichi Dome, and one of the guys' names was Karl Warensky. And the great story about Warensky. In 1862, and he and 9 other guys were in that area by Tamichi Dome, and they had mined about $50,000 worth of gold. And they put it in a wooden box and put it under the cleft of some rocks. And one day the Ute Indians became very dangerous, didn't like the white man trespassing on their land, and they attacked and they killed 8 men. And Karl Warensky survived by hiding under a rock and made his way out. When he got back to Denver, He had escaped from a Russian ship, Poland part of Russia at that time. He was found out, and he found out that his father had passed away in Poland, and he went back. And when he got back to Poland, he was arrested as a deserter. And he spent the next 18 years in a Siberian labor camp. And he escaped in 1880. And he made his way back to Denver. And then he made his way back to where that $50,000 worth of gold was buried. But when he got back, all the trees were burned down. 3,000 people were in the area. Nothing looked the same. He couldn't find it. And he walked into the post office. And he met a guy named Dutch Henry Scherenbeck. And he told Dutch Henry the story. And Dutch Henry had been around in these earlier days too. And he took Warensky out, and they found the $50,000. And Karl Warensky walked into the Pitkin Independent newspaper, gave Scherenbeck a $1,000 reward, took out a 20-year subscription to the Pitkin Independent, and left to go back to Danzig in his home area of Poland. One of the great early stories. Rich silver discoveries soon came at Quartzville. Quartzville would soon be named Pitkin after Frederick W. Pitkin, the governor of Colorado. By the end of 1880, 3,000 people came to Pitkin over Cottonwood, Cumberland, Marshall, and Hancock passes. Now you're looking at a photo where an 8-horse team is bringing in a boiler to be used in the mining operation near Pitkin. And that's how that stuff was brought in. The Bonton restaurant came, a 16 by 24 foot tent with a sawdust floor. There were 400 buildings and tents, 4 hotels, 12 saloons, a bank, a post office, the Pitkin Independent paper, a 10 stamp mill, and great mines with names like the Fairview, the Silver Island, and the Red Jacket. Now, as you look at that photograph, we'll go back to the previous one, Nell, if we can. You can see in the front the tracks of the Denver South Park Railroad, and on the left side of the photograph you can see a 10 stamp mill. And beyond that, in the foreground, that's where the Alpine Tunnel was, about 13 miles away from Pitkin. In July of 1881, Thomas Coleman, a Negro boss of the South Park grading crew, killed Albert Smith, a black teamster, over $5 he lost in a poker game. He was arrested, taken to Gunnison, and hung at the courthouse in December of '81. And there is a great shot of Pitkin at its peak. Main Street, great buildings, the commercial hotel in the background, and Pitkin seemed to have it all. Denver South Park and Pacific Railroad, rich silver mines, a smelter, a stamp mill, great stands of timber nearby, which provided timber for railroad ties, cabins, and for the Crested Butte coal mines. However, 3 bad fires of 1883, 1898, and 1903, the closing of the Alpine Tunnel, low-grade ore, and the silver panic hit Pitkin very hard, and most people left. Only the fish hatchery, which went in 1913, and the great timber industry kept it alive. Today, about 100 people live in Pitkin year-round. Another great mining camp of the Gunnison Country was Tin Cup. In 1860, a miner by the name of Jim Taylor from Granite worked his way over Lake Pass at the north end of Taylor Park and looked in at beautiful Taylor Park, 30 miles long and 8 miles wide, and one stream after another coming off the divide and running into the park. Willow Creek, Texas Creek, Illinois Creek, Tellurium Creek, Bowman Creek. He went back to Granite, got 4 of his friends. And in the summer of 1860, they came into the park and began to placer mine. And one day the horses got away. And Jim Taylor went after the horses, and it was a hot day. And he took his tin cup out of his backpack and he scooped out a drink of water out of Willow Creek. And as he did, he noticed gold in the bottom of the stream and he panned out about a half an ounce of gold. Keep that in mind for about 5 minutes later. The following year, the men had to leave, fall came on. The following year, Taylor came back into the park that bears his name today. He was followed by a man named Fred Lottis. And Lottis got lost and he went into an adjoining park. Because Lottis was from the Union when the Civil War broke out, he called it Union Park. And you can still see Fred Lottis's placer diggings there today. Now you're looking at Tin Cup Pass, 12,154 feet, which comes out of St. Elmo on the east slope and goes right into Tin Cup, and that's during a storm in the 1880s. One of the main routes in was Cottonwood Pass from Buena Vista right into the park. And that road was built by the legendary freighter Dave Wood in 1877. And Dave Wood, his daughters later on would write a book about him, and it was based on Dave Wood being in the Colorado mountains, probably around Telluride. Young lady walks up to him, says, "Sir, you been in these parts long?" And David Wood, the greatest freighter in Western Colorado, eyed that young lady with contemptuous disdain and said, "Madam, I haul these damn mountains in here." And that is the title of the book by his daughters, "I Haul These Mountains in Here." And Cottonwood Pass was the first road built into the Gunnison Country over the divide. Now, last year, they finished paving the west side. And today, Cottonwood Pass at 12,126 feet in elevation is the highest paved road over the Continental Divide in the United States. The first great town in the Taylor Park area was Hillerton, 2 miles south of today's Tin Cup. 2,000 miners came in there in 1879, and the first paper in the Gunnison Country, the Hillerton Occident, was printed there. Lots sold like hotcakes. The town got a post office, 160 houses went up. A Rocky Mountain News reporter said, and I quote, "Hillerton has the advantage of water, timber, and climate, and is right in the heart of the mines. It is the coming city." However, for Hillerton, tragedy, because Virginia City, 2 miles away to the south, was much closer to the mines, and Hillerton was gone by 1881. The Virginia City name, however, was confused with Virginia City, Nevada, and Virginia City, Montana, and the post office demanded that the name be changed so the damn mail wouldn't be confused. And now, in a big meeting, all the miners got together and they decided to name it after the tin cup that Jim Taylor had used to scoop out a little water and then found gold while scooping it out almost 20 years earlier. So Tin Cup on the edge of Taylor Park now became the great town. It boomed immediately, but it was a lawless town because Black Hills men from South Dakota dominated it. 3 marshals and ex-marshals were killed in the first 3 years. One of the most famous residents of Tin Cup, and you're looking at it in 1905 right now, and that is the famous City Hall that you see with the steeple built 2 years earlier in 1903. One of the most famous residents of Tin Cup was Aunt Kate Fisher, an ex-slave from Virginia. She ran a hotel restaurant, and when she died, the entire camp turned out for the funeral. Another legendary guy was Alex Parent. He was from the San Laurentian Mountains of French Quebec, Canada, and he knew how to ski. And from 1880 to 1918, Parent carried the mail, winter and summer, winter on skis, summer on horseback, St. Elmo on the eastern slope, Tin Cup Pass, Tin Cup, 30 miles through Taylor Park, up over Taylor Pass at 11,800 feet, down Express Creek into Ashcroft, and then 11 miles further into Aspen. 3-day trip, winter and summer, legendary mail carrier of the Colorado Rockies. Tin Cup has a unique graveyard, which is divided up into 4 sections. Catholics have a knoll, Jewish people have a knoll, Protestants have a knoll, and Butte Hill has a knoll. The mining camp peaked at 3,000 with 3 hotels, the St. James, the Pacific, and the Grand Central. The great silver mines with the Gold Cup, the Enterprise, the Star, and the Jimmy Mack. 2 aerial trams carried ore from mines to mills. And now we take a look at Carl Foster on the left and Bill Sheldon on the right. Carl Foster was a mining engineer for the Enterprise mine from 1908 to 1914. In 1980, I got a letter from Chatham, Massachusetts. And it was from Carl Foster. And he said, I heard you're working on the Gunnison Country. And he told me about himself, and he said, I have failed in the last year, quite a bit. And he sent me 100 photographs of Taylor Park, of the Enterprise mine, and all the other things going on, 1908 to 1914. When they put up an interpretive sign at Dorchester about 5 years ago, and I gave them the photo, they said, how do you want this recognized? And I said, you don't get the photo unless you say Carl Foster gave the photograph. Recognition of a guy I always wished I could have had a chance to meet. Many promising camps existed in the Taylor Park area, with names like Emma and Bowman and Abbeville and Garfield and Hillerton and Tin Cup. Tin Cup, however, like other silver camps, went downhill in the 1880s because of no railroad, difficult transportation, low-grade ore, and the silver panic. And there's another photo of Tin Cup in the early years. And then, after the silver panic, Tin Cup is no more except a ghost town. From 1935 to 37, 300 men worked for the Bureau of Reclamation and built the Taylor Dam, which backed up the Taylor Reservoir. And you can see them building that dam in 1935. The earthen dam is 185 feet high, holds 106,200 acre-feet of water owned by the Uncompahgre water users out of Montrose. And ladies and gentlemen, read them and weep as I tell you this, the biggest fish in Colorado are right below the spillway. And they're the biggest fish because nobody can fish there, and they feed on micro shrimp. There are fish there, trout there, estimated by the Game and Fish of 40 pounds. You get caught fishing there, that's a federal offense, and you're going to go to jail. So nobody can fish there, and game wardens are like mosquitoes. They're all over the place. The last great silver town in the Gunnison Country is White Pine, located not far from Monarch Pass and at the head of the Tamichi Creek. It began in 1880, named for the mines, named for the trees in the area, the pine trees in the area. Nearby was another great town called North Star, about a mile above White Pine, and there's North Star in the year 1880. About 1,000 miners flocked in over Monarch Pass into White Pine. The White Pine and Tamichi stage ran between White Pine and Sargent's. 50 cabins dotted the narrow gulch. Now there's White Pine. White Pine had 5 stores, 3 saloons, 3 hotels, and a famous paper, I love the name, the White Pine Cone. It also had rich mines like the North Star, the May Mazeppa, and the Akron Tunnel. In the 1860s, in a gulch near White Pine, 2 miners hit good gold. But when they left with their treasure, they became snowblind and died, their bones seen by later miners. Today, that gulch is known as Snowblind Gulch, and nobody's ever found the gold. White Pine was very unique in the Gunnison Country because of World War I and World War II. During both wars, White Pine operated full blast, producing lead, zinc, and copper for the war efforts. It got a big flotation mill in 1947, and mining went on to 1953, long after all the other camps closed. Now, there was a lady in the 1930s with her son in a snowdrift box mounted on top of a sled, and she's going to ski from White Pine into Sargent's and catch the railroad. Over 50 miners worked at the Akron Tunnel Mine, and White Pine had a school and a rope toll put in by the miners for the children. And in the 1950s, it was the third largest town in the Gunnison Country. Today, in the fall, when the aspen turn bright yellow, they make up a perfect Liberty Bell amidst the evergreens in Battlement Park near White Pine. Today, the Los Angeles Police Department owns most of the homes in White Pine. So I would suggest nobody would commit a crime in White Pine, otherwise you're probably in trouble. Here are the important things to remember about mining in the Gunnison Country. It brought in the first real population, 25 to 40,000. It created a lot of wealth. It did a lot of environmental damage, with streams polluted, forests clear-cut, and mine waste everywhere. And it also led to the coming of railroad smellers and investors. It publicized the Gunnison Country. Now, as I finish, we're going to go about 5 minutes overtime today. I'm going to give you folks some of the characteristics of the mining camps of the Gunnison Country and of Colorado. Number one, they were urban frontiers. Whenever you put 3,000 to 4,000 people in one spot, it's urban. Number two, they lacked self-sufficiency. The only thing mining camps could produce was meat and timber, and when they shot the hell out of the deer and cut down all the timber, they didn't even have that. That's how ranchers became famous, because they supplied those mining camps with beef. Number three, they had a speculative gambling instinct. They were only there for one reason, the miners, and that was to hit it rich. Number four, culturally, they were very high. Many languages, many different cultures, people from all over the world. Number five, the extractive nature of mining camps meant that they led a short existence. The more ore you took out of the ground, the less ore that was left in the ground, and when all the ore is out of the ground, the mining camp died. Number six, mining camps left residue. They left supply towns. All those mining camps in the Gunnison Country die, but Crested, Butte, and Gunnison don't. In San Juan, Uray, Telluride, Lake City died. Durango doesn't. In Clear Creek Canyon, Central City, and Black Hawk died. Golden doesn't. Number seven, the isolated and short existence of mining camps forced it to solve problems quickly and pragmatically. Number eight, they were greatly influenced by the federal government, which paid for Indian protection, subsidized railroads, set the price of gold and silver high enough, and owned land the miners took over. Number nine, mining camps were very intolerant towards Mormons, Orientals, Mexicans, and Indians, but non-African Americans. And finally, failure was very common in mining camps. They called mining camps a meeting ground for failures, high risk, no stigma attached to failure. Well, folks, that's it. Next week, railroads of the Gunnison Country. Thank you for being aboard. And now, if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer. I'm looking at one from Michael Guerreri. Michael, yes, I have covered the Panic of 1918. And if you go to the Crested Butte News on March the 13th on page 23, you'll see a big article on it.
All right.
Diane Holly, thank you for the kind words. Chrissy Menzie Schaefer from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, thanks for being aboard. Marianne Havens of the TKDs, the Tapakega Days, thanks for tuning in. Ken Jessen, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? I can see you on the chat machine.
We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. The first one's from Bobby Martin. If a new gold silver discovery were to happen, where do you think it would be?
Well, I think in gold, you're talking about Ohio Creek, where they had the Gold Links, the Sandy Hook, the Raymond, They had big gold mills and gold mines in that area. Silver, you know, there's silver all over the place, but unfortunately, unlike Telluride and Uray and Silverton, we did not have the high grade silver. James Grant, the top mining man of Leadville, referred to it as knife blade seams. But we got a lot of lead. Now, I always say this about the Gunnison Country, one of the most versatile mining areas in the world. We got marble, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Lincoln Memorial. We got granite, Colorado State Capitol. We got lead, we got zinc, we got copper, we got gold, we got silver. On Mount Emmons, we got the fourth largest deposit and the richest deposit of molybdenum in the world. So we get all kinds of mineral wealth. Any other questions?
Yeah, Eric Raddick is asking, are you going to do a presentation on the differences between gold and silver mining culture and coal mining?
We will have one of my presentations on coal mining, you bet. And I will talk about the difference between gold and silver, but mostly coal and the immigrants who came to mine.
All right. Jeff asks, Gunnison was a mining supply camp. Years after attending Western State, I heard Wyatt Earp ended up in Gunnison running a gambling operation. Any truth to this?
Absolute truth. Right where Treads and Threads is today on Main Street, Wyatt Earp and his brother Morgan ran a faro exchange. But they're only here for about 3 months, and they were hiding out from the law because of the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. You also might be interested in, and we'll talk about this later on, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid stopped for a beer at Cocheevers during their heyday. Jesse and Frank James worked on a ranch hiding out from the law out near Parlin. Billy the Kid was hiding out near Doyleville. All great stories. Any other questions?
You know, I've got a question. It seems like a lot of these mining camps and early mining operations were getting set up when this was still Ute territory. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, the Ute Indians had this area until the Bruneau Treaty of 1873. Then following that, they were moved out into Kelowna and Montrose area, and 6 years later moved out of Colorado.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? It's great to see some of the folks. I say hi to Gary Weber, say hi to Barb's and Jeremy. Good to see all you guys.
All right.
Any other questions?
We've got one more question. Any more on Creed?
Well, we'll talk about Creed a little bit. We get over to a little more gold and silver. It was the last silver camp in Colorado. And Cy Warman wrote, it's day all day in the daytime, but there is no night in Creed. So we will talk a little bit more about that.
And then,
folks, it's been great to, go ahead.
One last question from Jeremy. Why the LAPD in White Pine?
Because in the 1950s, one of their members came in. He was a tourist. He really liked the area. And at that time, you could buy, you know, for practically nothing. So he told all his friends, and that's why the LAPD is there today. Don't commit any crimes in White Pine.
So I said we had one more question, but now we really do only have one more question.
That's great. Keep coming.
This is from our friend Pete Dunda. What was the music in the mining camps?
You know, Pete, my good friend's got the great polka band, just had shoulder surgery. As Pete knows and I know, that was the #1 type of music, and everybody and his brother had an accordion. And they were playing the beer barrel polka and all of the great favorite polkas, the wooden heart polka, and a lot of ethnic polkas. I'll tell you a quick story. When I first came here in 1962, I was born in a Belgian farming community at St. Nicholas in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And my dad was off the boat like everybody else, and everybody talked in a clipped accent. So when I came to Gunnison, I went up to Crested, Butte the first week, and I heard everybody talking in clipped accents, and I said, I'm home. I'm home. I came in from one immigrant town into another immigrant town, and I've loved the area ever since. Pete, good luck to you. I know you're doing well. Katie Keller, tell Ron hi for me. Good to see you. Jan, good to see you. Any other questions?
All right, that looks like the last of them.
If not, don't forget about the scholarships, folks, and I'll see you next week. Railroads of the Gunnison Country, a lot of great stories.
Remember, everybody, you can tell your friends all about this webinar. Just send them to CrestedViewMuseum.com to support programming like this and all the other programming we do. Again, please do make a donation. Part of the donation for this, as Duane said, goes to a scholarship, an education scholarship for a local student. We'll see you all next week. Thanks so much, Duane.
Liz, good to see you. Thank you, Nell. We're signing off, I guess.